The hum of the airplane engines created a dull roar as the aircraft taxied down the runway at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Marcus settled into his seat, a window view that looked out over the bustling airport. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the remnants of the long day that led him to this moment. With a briefcase at his feet and a well-worn book in his hands, he was ready for the long flight ahead. The anticipation of reaching Los Angeles filled him with a mix of excitement and anxiety, the latter stemming from the hidden truths he carried with him. As passengers shuffled down the aisle, Marcus's gaze drifted to the woman who would soon occupy the seat next to him. She was impeccably dressed in high-end fashion, her perfectly coiffed hair framing a face that dripped with entitlement. Karen, as her boarding pass indicated, clutched her designer handbag like a shield. When she approached, Marcus stood to let her pass, but she didn't acknowledge him. Instead, she eyed him with a mix of disdain and curiosity as she slid into her seat. "Great, just what I needed," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for him to hear. Her voice dripped with condescension. "I thought this was first class, not a community college reunion. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our updates. Your support helps us bring you the best content possible." Continuing, Marcus felt the heat rise to his cheeks but chose to remain silent, turning his attention to the book in his hands. It was a classic novel, one that had always offered him an escape from reality. The pages whispered stories of resilience and struggle, a stark contrast to the woman seated beside him. Karen huffed, adjusting her seatbelt with exaggerated movements. "You know, I've flown this route many times, and I've never had to sit next to someone like you," she continued, her tone dripping with disdain. "Why do they let anyone on these planes nowadays?" His heart raced at her words, but Marcus remained composed, focusing on the text before him. He had learned over the years that engaging in conflict rarely led to resolution. Instead, he felt a calm determination to rise above the negativity. As the plane took off, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of weightlessness, a momentary thrill that momentarily eased the tension in his chest. The city he loved faded into the distance, and he allowed himself to imagine the opportunities that awaited him in Los Angeles. But Karen's voice pulled him back to the present. "Did you seriously just bring that book on a plane? What are you, a professor?" she scoffed, shooting a glance at the cover with disdain. "Must be nice to have all that time to read while the rest of us are working hard." He finally turned to face her, maintaining his composure. "It's a good story," he said simply, trying to keep the peace. "It helps me relax." "Relax? You should be more concerned about looking presentable," she replied, her voice rising slightly. "It's a shame you don't seem to care how you present yourself. People like you should be more mindful." The other passengers around them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, casting furtive glances towards the unfolding scene. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, some averted, others curious. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that he was not the one in the wrong. "Perhaps we could focus on our own journeys instead of judging each other?" Marcus suggested, his tone calm but firm. He hoped to divert the conversation away from personal attacks and toward a more neutral ground. Karen laughed, a sharp, derisive sound that cut through the cabin. "You really think you can talk to me like that? I'm not interested in a lecture from someone who clearly doesn't belong here." The tension in the air thickened, a palpable energy that made Marcus feel as if the entire cabin had leaned in to witness the unfolding drama. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, but he refused to let her provoke him further. Instead, he returned to his book, hoping to drown out her words in the printed pages. As the flight progressed, Karen's comments escalated. "You know, it's people like you who make this world so complicated," she said, her voice louder now, attracting the attention of nearby passengers. "If everyone just stayed in their own lane, we wouldn't have these issues." Marcus's patience thinned, but he remained silent, knowing that any response would only fuel her fire. He could feel the stares of the other passengers, their unease palpable as they shifted in their seats, unsure of how to respond to the growing confrontation. "Why do you have to be so sensitive?" Karen continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're really making a scene. Just because you think you're entitled to respect doesn't mean you deserve it." Feeling the weight of her words, Marcus finally set his book aside. He looked her in the eye, his voice steady. "I'm not sensitive. I just believe we should treat each other with respect, regardless of our differences." "Respect?" she scoffed. "You think you can demand respect just by sitting next to me? You don't even belong in this class of service." The other passengers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others whispering among themselves. A few had pulled out their phones, capturing the unfolding drama, while others simply looked away, uncomfortable with the confrontation. "Seriously, can we keep it down?" A man a few rows back interjected, his voice low but firm. "We're all just trying to enjoy the flight." But Karen was far from finished. Her eyes narrowed as she stood up abruptly, drawing even more attention to herself. "This man is being disruptive," she shouted, pointing directly at Marcus. "He's causing a scene and making me uncomfortable. Someone needs to do something about this." The atmosphere shifted dramatically, a heavy weight settling over the cabin as passengers turned their heads, some with expressions of disbelief and others whispering among themselves. The flight attendants, noticing the commotion, began to make their way down the aisle. Marcus felt his heart race, the humiliation washing over him like a tidal wave. He could feel the eyes of strangers bore into him, judging and assessing. For a moment, he considered standing up for himself, but the calm demeanor he had worked so hard to cultivate held him back. He was on a flight, thousands of feet in the air, with no escape from the situation unfolding before him. "Ma'am, please take your seat," a flight attendant named David said as he approached. He was tall and composed, his uniform crisp and professional. "We don't want to escalate this any further." Karen glared at him, her face flushed with indignation. "I will not sit next to someone who thinks they can bully me into silence. This is unacceptable." Marcus felt the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He looked around the cabin, searching for a sign of support, but found only uncertain expressions. Would anyone stand up for him? Would anyone speak out against the injustice that was unfolding? As David attempted to defuse the situation, Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. He was determined not to let this moment define him. He had faced worse in his life, and he would not allow Karen's ignorant prejudice to overshadow his dignity. "Please, let's just all try to remain civil," Marcus said, his voice steady but low. "We're all on this flight together, and we should treat each other with kindness." But Karen was not ready to back down. Instead, she pressed on, her voice rising to a near shout, as the eyes of the cabin remained fixed on the drama unfolding before them. Marcus felt the weight of the moment bear down heavily, but he refused to let it crush him. He could feel the tension crackling in the air, the anticipation of what might happen next hanging like a storm cloud over them all. The atmosphere in the cramped cabin of the aircraft felt electric, as if the very air was charged with the tension of unresolved conflict. David, the flight attendant, had just witnessed the culmination of Karen's relentless barrage of insults towards Marcus. He stepped forward, his heart pounding, determined to restore order before the situation spiraled further out of control. "Ma'am, could you please return to your seat?" David said, his voice steady yet firm. He directed his gaze towards Karen, whose face was flushed with indignation. "This is an aircraft, not a courtroom. We need to keep the peace for everyone's safety." Karen turned to him, her eyes blazing with fury. "Do you know who I am? I will have your job for this." Her voice dripped with entitlement, cutting through the murmurs of discomfort that rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, but unsure of how to intervene. "Right now, I'm just doing my job," David replied, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Karen's chaos. "And my priority is ensuring the safety and comfort of all our passengers. So, if you could just sit down, we can all move on with our flight." A fleeting moment of surprise flickered across Karen's face as she processed his words. For a brief second, the storm within her seemed to waver, but then it surged back with greater intensity. This man, She gestured wildly at Marcus, her voice rising again. He's a menace. David interjected, "Ma'am, I need you to take your seat now." His tone left no room for argument. "You can voice your concerns in a more appropriate manner after we land." Reluctantly, Karen huffed and dropped back into her seat, arms crossed and lips pursed in a sulky frown. David took a deep breath, turning his attention to Marcus, who sat with his hands clasped in his lap, the corners of his mouth set in a small, tight line of restraint. "Are you okay, sir?" David asked, his voice softer now, filled with genuine concern. Marcus met David's gaze, and for a moment, the weight of humiliation that had settled on his shoulders began to lift. "I'm fine," he replied, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the turmoil he felt inside. "Just trying to keep my cool." David nodded, appreciating Marcus's composure amidst the chaos. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'm here to help." He offered a reassuring smile before moving on to check on other passengers, leaving Marcus to grapple with the tumultuous emotions that swirled within him. As the flight continued, Lisa, a fellow passenger who had been seated a few rows back, quietly recorded the incident on her phone. She had witnessed the unfolding drama, her heart aching for Marcus as Karen's venomous words echoed in her ears. She quickly sent a message to a friend, hoping to gather support for Marcus once they landed. "You won't believe what's happening on this flight," she typed, her fingers flying over the screen. "There's a man being harassed by a woman. I'm recording it. I'll share it with you later." With the camera still rolling, Lisa focused on Marcus, whose expression was a mixture of anger and sorrow. She could sense the struggle within him. He was a man trapped in a storm of prejudice, fighting not just for himself but for anyone who had ever been subjected to such indignity. As her phone captured the moment, she felt a surge of determination. This was not just a moment for Marcus. It was a moment for everyone who had ever faced discrimination. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the cabin had thickened with tension, the air heavy with unspoken words. Passengers glanced nervously at one another, unsure of how to react. Some looked at Marcus with sympathy, while others cast wary glances toward Karen, who sat simmering in her seat, her eyes darting around the cabin, searching for allies. Suddenly, Karen's voice sliced through the silence once more. "I'm going to report him to the airline. He's a danger to everyone here." Her tone was laced with malice, and the words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Marcus felt his heart race as he absorbed her threat. He had remained silent until now, but the injustice of her accusation ignited a fire within him. Taking a deep breath, he stood up, his tall frame commanding attention. "Excuse me, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'd like to address this situation." His calm demeanor surprised even him, but he knew he needed to speak up. "I understand that emotions are running high, but I assure you, I pose no threat to anyone on this flight." Karen scoffed, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "You think you can just talk your way out of this? You're nothing but a troublemaker." Ignoring her outburst, Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the cabin, meeting the gaze of several passengers who nodded in support. "I'm not here to create conflict. I'm a man who simply wants to travel in peace. But I also believe that we must call out prejudices when we see them, regardless of where we are." His words hung in the air, powerful and resonant. The passengers shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, captivated by his calm authority. David returned to Marcus's side, supportive and vigilant, ready to intervene if necessary. "Ma'am," Marcus addressed Karen directly, "I do not know you, and I have no desire to engage in an argument. My hope is simply to remind everyone that kindness and understanding should prevail. Especially in moments like these." Karen rolled her eyes, dismissing his plea as if it were nothing more than a mosquito buzzing in her ear. "You think you can lecture me? I'm not interested in your excuses." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing upon him, but he stood firm. "This isn't about excuses. It's about respect. We all deserve to be treated with dignity, regardless of our backgrounds." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Several passengers shifted in their seats, leaning closer, intrigued by Marcus's bravery. Lisa continued to record, aware that this was an important moment, not just for Marcus, but for the larger conversation about race and discrimination. "Your ignorance is showing, Karen," one passenger called out, emboldened by Marcus's courage. "It's time to grow up and accept that we're all in this together." The supportive murmurs began to spread through the cabin, and Karen's face twisted with disbelief. "You're all siding with him?" she exclaimed, her voice rising again in outrage. "This is ridiculous." As Marcus stood tall, a sense of empowerment surged within him. He had fought battles before, but this was different. This was not just a personal struggle. It was a moment that could inspire others to stand against injustice. "Thank you for your support," he said, turning to the passengers. "I want to remind you all that our differences should be celebrated, not weaponized. We have more in common than we realize, and it's time we start acting like it." The cabin erupted into a chorus of agreement from several passengers, their expressions shifting from discomfort to solidarity. It was clear that Marcus's words had struck a chord, igniting a spark of resilience that was palpable in the air. As the flight pressed on, the tension remained, but it was now intertwined with a sense of unity. David stood sentinel by Marcus's side, ready to defend him if needed, while Lisa continued to document the unfolding drama, aware that this was a moment that needed to be shared. In that cramped cabin, amidst the chaos and uncertainty, Marcus had chosen to rise above the hate, wielding his words as a powerful tool against prejudice. The stakes were high, but he was ready to face whatever came next, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized in the face of ignorance. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself as he stood before the row of seats, every eye in the cabin fixed on him. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers of disbelief washed over him like a wave. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he knew he had to speak. He cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the passengers. "I understand that we are all here together, sharing this flight, and what happened just now is upsetting. I want to talk to you about something important." Karen, seated directly beside him, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, crossing her arms defensively. The look of indignation on her face was palpable, but Marcus pressed on. "I'm not here to defend myself," he continued, his voice rising slightly to capture their attention. "I'm here to share a truth that many of us face every day. The truth about discrimination, about prejudice, and about how it can manifest in the most unexpected places. I've experienced it myself countless times." He paused, allowing his words to resonate, and he could see a few passengers nodding in understanding. A young woman in the front row shifted in her seat, her expression softening as she leaned in to listen more closely. "I was a child once, just like many of you were," he said, his tone becoming more intimate. "I remember walking home from school, feeling proud of my achievements, only to be met with hateful words and looks from strangers. I remember how it felt to be judged not by my character, but by the color of my skin." The cabin fell silent as Marcus spoke, the only sound being the gentle hum of the plane's engines. He could feel the weight of their attentiveness, their shifting perspectives. It's a painful experience, one that can leave scars that last a lifetime. But through those experiences, I've learned resilience. I've learned that while we can't control how others act, we can control how we respond. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're just playing the victim," she muttered, but her voice was shaky, revealing her discomfort. Marcus ignored her but felt a surge of anger bubble inside him. He focused instead on the passengers, who were now visibly engaged, some even leaning forward, eager to hear more. "I stand before you not just as a victim, but as a survivor," he declared, his voice rising with passion. "I've fought against injustice not just for myself, but for those who may not have a voice. Discrimination is not just an event. It's a mindset that we must challenge. It's easy to point fingers, to make assumptions based on our biases, but it takes courage to look beyond those biases, A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin, and Marcus felt a swell of hope. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for understanding. Understanding that we are all human beings with our own stories, our own struggles, and that the way we treat each other matters deeply. As he spoke, he noticed Lisa in the back, her phone raised discreetly, recording the moment. He offered her a brief nod, grateful for her support. The flight attendants had gathered near the front, and David stood with a supportive expression, clearly moved by Marcus's words. I want to challenge you all to think about your own biases, Marcus continued, his voice steady, to consider how your words and actions can impact someone else's life. We often underestimate the power of our voice, but it can uplift or destroy. In a moment, we can choose to build bridges or erect walls. Karen's face flushed with anger. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she desperately searched for something, anything, to regain control of the narrative. You don't know what you're talking about, she shouted, standing up abruptly, her eyes wild. You're just trying to manipulate everyone here. The passengers shifted in their seats, some exchanging glances, unsure how to react. Marcus maintained his composure, refusing to let her outburst shake him. I'm not here to manipulate anyone, he replied calmly. I'm here to speak my truth. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time to reflect on why. Karen's hands trembled as she glared at him. I'll have you thrown off this plane. You think you can just stand there and… Karen, David interjected, stepping forward, his voice authoritative but measured. This isn't helping. You need to sit down and let him speak. The tension in the cabin surged as passengers watched the drama unfold. The murmurs grew louder, and a few people began to clap, voices rising in support of Marcus. Thank you, he said, the warmth of their support washing over him. Thank you for believing in the power of dialogue. Karen's expression morphed from anger to desperation as she tried to salvage her narrative. I know what I saw. He's hiding something, she yelled, her voice cracking. He's a criminal, I swear. You can't trust him. The passengers exchanged looks of disbelief, some whispering to each other. What proof do you have? A voice called from the back, and another passenger added, You're just making things worse for yourself. Marcus turned to face the crowd, his heart racing but his resolve stronger than ever. I understand that this is a lot to process, he said, his voice resonating in the cabin. But let's not forget that accusations without evidence are just noise. I'm happy to share my story, but I refuse to allow false narratives to define who I am. David stepped closer to Marcus, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I think it's time we check the passenger list, he suggested, his eyes darting to Karen. We can verify identities and put an end to this. No, Karen shrieked, her voice filled with panic. You can't do that. This is ridiculous. I demand an immediate landing. The flight attendants exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed. The tension in the cabin was palpable, and Marcus could feel the weight of every gaze upon him. Karen, David said firmly, you need to calm down. This isn't helping anyone, least of all you. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to remain composed amidst the chaos. I just want to remind everyone that we are all on this journey together. We can choose to support one another, or we can let fear and prejudice divide us. I choose unity. The murmurs of agreement grew louder, and Marcus's heart swelled with gratitude for the support he was receiving. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the tide turning away from Karen's vitriol and toward a collective understanding. As the plane continued its course, the once tense environment began to crackle with a sense of camaraderie. People began to share their own stories of resilience, their voices blending into a chorus of shared humanity. Marcus felt a flicker of hope igniting within him, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, connection could shine through. He glanced at Karen, who was now seated with her head down, her bravado crumbling. The realization that her attempts to gaslight and manipulate were failing seemed to dawn on her, and Marcus felt a bittersweet satisfaction at the sight. Thank you for listening, he concluded, his voice steady as he turned back to the passengers. I hope we can all leave this flight with a renewed commitment to understanding and compassion. We are stronger together, and it's time we start acting like it." The cabin erupted in applause, and Marcus couldn't help but smile. Relief washed over him, mingling with the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had stood his ground, and in doing so, he had forged a connection with those around him, transforming a moment of hatred into a powerful testament of resilience. As the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, the atmosphere inside the cabin was thick with tension. The hum of the engines mixed with the muffled whispers of passengers, their glances darting between Marcus and Karen. Lisa, sitting a few rows back, kept her phone discreetly pointed toward the unfolding drama, her heart racing as she captured every moment. She knew this wasn't just a petty altercation. It was a significant clash of ideologies, and she felt compelled to document it. Marcus sat upright, his fingers tapping nervously against the armrest. He had remained calm through the storm of Karen's insults, but now, with the ground rapidly approaching, the weight of the situation pressed heavily upon him. The text from his friend vibrated against his thigh, breaking his reverie. He glanced down at his phone, his brow furrowing as he read the words. "Marcus, just saw the news. Are you on that flight? I can't believe it's you. You need to handle this." A rush of emotions surged through him as he realized the implications of his identity as a civil rights lawyer. He had dedicated his life to fighting against the very prejudice Karen was displaying. Taking a deep breath, he felt a newfound sense of determination. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about standing up for everyone who had been marginalized, silenced, or diminished in the face of hatred. Karen, meanwhile, was fidgeting in her seat, her face a mask of anxiety and desperation. She had been riding high on her entitlement, but the moment she recognized the name Marcus Jordan, one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country, her confidence wavered. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together a strategy to redeem herself. "This can't be happening," she muttered under her breath, her eyes darting around the cabin, searching for allies. "Excuse me, David," the flight attendant approached her cautiously, his expression stern yet calm. "I need you to remain seated until we reach the gate. We'll be landing shortly, and I recommend you take a moment to reflect on your behavior." "Reflect? You're siding with him," she hissed, her voice laced with indignation. "He's a criminal. You don't understand what he is capable of." "Ma'am," David replied firmly, "that's not for you to decide. You've made serious allegations, and it's important that we allow the authorities to handle this appropriately." Karen's frantic energy only intensified as the plane glided toward the runway. She leaned across the aisle, trying to catch the attention of other passengers. "Can't you see what he's doing? He's trying to intimidate me. I'm a paying customer. I have rights." Her voice rose, drawing the attention of those around her. Marcus turned to face her, his expression unyielding. "What I'm trying to do is speak the truth. I'm not here to intimidate you, Karen. I'm here to stand against your prejudices." "Prejudices?" Karen scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you can change the way people feel just because you're some fancy lawyer? What makes you so special?" "I never claimed to be special," he replied, his voice steady. "But I know that standing up for what's right is a responsibility we all share. You chose to attack me based on a misunderstanding, and now you're trying to manipulate everyone into believing I'm the villain. That has to stop." The cabin grew silent, the passengers absorbing his words. Lisa continued to record, her heart racing as she captured the growing tension. She knew the importance of this moment, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had ever faced similar discrimination. "I don't need to justify myself to you," Karen spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You're just playing the victim card because you think it'll get you sympathy. You don't know what it's like to actually be in danger." Marcus's eyes narrowed, and he took a moment before responding. "You know what I do know? I know that danger comes in many forms. It can be a physical threat, but it can also be the insidious way words can wound and diminish someone's humanity. I've seen it time and again in my work." Karen's facade began to crack, her bravado faltering in the face of Marcus's calm strength. "You're not the only one with a story, you know," she retorted, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've worked hard for everything I have. I've built my life from the ground up, and that's commendable," Marcus said, his tone softening slightly. "But hard work doesn't give you the right to demean others or to assume that your experience is the only valid one. We all have our battles to fight, Karen." As the plane touched the ground and began taxiing toward the gate, the reality of their situation settled heavily upon both of them. Marcus's heart raced with the anticipation of the confrontation that awaited them on the tarmac. Would the authorities take his side? Would they believe the evidence of Karen's racism? Or would they dismiss it as just another flight dispute? Karen's eyes darted around the cabin, and for a moment, she looked genuinely afraid. "You don't want to do this," she said, her voice low and pleading. "I have connections. I can make your life miserable." Marcus felt a flicker of sympathy for her, realizing that her actions stemmed from fear and ignorance. "I'm not trying to make your life miserable, Karen. I just want to ensure that justice is served. You need to understand that your actions have consequences, and it's time to face them." The plane came to a stop, and the seatbelt sign flickered off. Passengers began to gather their belongings, the atmosphere buzzing with anticipation. Lisa stood up, her heart pounding as she prepared to follow Marcus off the plane. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger. As Marcus rose from his seat, he locked eyes with Karen one last time. "This isn't just about us, Karen. It's about everyone who has been hurt by people like you. I hope you take this opportunity to reflect on your actions and the impact they have on others." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she watched in a mix of fear and fury as Marcus walked toward the exit, ready to confront whatever awaited him outside. The moment felt monumental, as if the very fabric of their society was hanging in the balance. David stood by the door, his expression supportive as he nodded at Marcus. "You did well up there," he said quietly. "Just hang in there. The truth will come out." As Marcus stepped onto the tarmac, the heat of the California sun washed over him, and he felt a rush of adrenaline. He could see law enforcement waiting near the gate, their presence a reminder that the stakes were high. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead, while behind him, Karen scrambled to gather her things, her composure unraveling with every passing moment. "Wait!" she shouted, her voice rising in panic. "You can't just leave me here. I was just trying to." But Marcus had already stepped into the light of accountability, ready to face whatever came next. As the passengers began to disembark from the plane, the atmosphere was thick with a mix of relief and unease. Marcus stood up, his heart pounding, but he was resolute. The moment he had been preparing for, though he hadn't expected it to unfold in quite this way, had finally arrived. He lifted his chin slightly, steadying his breath as he walked toward the front of the cabin, where the authorities awaited. Karen, who had been sitting a few rows back, was now in full panic mode. Her previously composed demeanor was shattered, her face flushed with anxiety as she fumbled with her designer handbag. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded, her voice edged with desperation. I was just confused. This is all a misunderstanding." Marcus took a deep breath, focusing on the officers who were listening intently to the unfolding drama. The weight of their gaze was heavy, but he felt an unexpected sense of empowerment. He approached the officers and gestured towards Lisa, who was still holding her phone, the video evidence of the events that had transpired during the flight. "Officer, I believe this will be important," Marcus said, his voice calm yet firm. "This woman has made several false accusations against me. I'd like you to see this video." He handed his phone over, his heart racing as he watched the officers scrutinize the footage. "Is this true?" one of the officers asked, turning his attention to Karen, who had now risen from her seat, her posture defensive. "Look, I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she stammered, her eyes darting between the officers and Marcus. "I just thought." "Thought what?" Marcus interrupted, his voice steady as he met her gaze. "That you could treat me with disrespect because of my skin color? That you could ruin my day with your unfounded accusations?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She glanced at the officers, who were watching her with skepticism. I just had a bad day. I didn't mean anything by it. Bad day or not, that does not justify your actions, Marcus replied, his tone unwavering. You've humiliated me in front of everyone. You've tried to paint me as a criminal without any basis. This is not just a misunderstanding. It's a reflection of your prejudice. The officers exchanged glances. We need you to calm down, ma'am, one of them said to Karen. This isn't helping your case. We'll review the video and take statements from all parties involved. As they continued to watch the footage, Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. The video captured not only the altercations but also the moments leading up to Karen's aggressive outburst. He could see the disbelief on the faces of the other passengers, their discomfort evident as they shifted in their seats, unsure of how to respond. Lisa stepped forward, clutching her phone tightly. I recorded everything, officer. I couldn't just sit back and watch. It was wrong, and I wanted evidence. Thank you for your cooperation, one of the officers replied, taking note of her statement. We'll need to speak with you as well. Karen, realizing the tide was turning against her, began to pace anxiously, her hands wringing together. You're all against me, she exclaimed, her voice rising. This isn't fair. I have every right to speak my mind. Rights don't give you the license to be cruel, Marcus shot back, his patience wearing thin. You've shown your true colors today. This isn't about you being misunderstood. It's about you misunderstanding me and many others like me. It's about your refusal to see beyond your privilege. The officers shifted their attention back to Marcus, impressed by his composure under such pressure. Sir, we appreciate your calmness throughout this incident, one of them said. It takes strength to stand your ground in the face of adversity. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. Strength? You think he's strong? He's just a criminal. Enough. One of the officers barked, causing Karen to flinch. We will investigate the matter thoroughly. If you have nothing legitimate to support your claims, we may have to take action against you. The reality of her situation began to sink in for Karen. The weight of her privilege, once a shield, now felt like a noose tightening around her neck. But I'm a respected member of my community, she pleaded, her voice shaking. You can't do this to me. Respect is earned, not given based on your status, Marcus replied, his voice steady. You've lost any respect you had by treating a fellow human being with such disdain. The atmosphere shifted further as more passengers exited the plane, drawn in by the commotion. They stood nearby, some whispering to each other, others recording the scene on their phones. Marcus caught a few sympathetic glances, and he felt a swell of support among the crowd. Are you okay? One woman asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. I saw everything. I'm fine. Thank you, Marcus replied, grateful for her kindness. He turned back to the officers who were still reviewing the footage. Finally, one of the officers broke the silence, looking directly at Karen. Based on the evidence we've seen and the statements we've collected, we have no choice but to take you into custody for your behavior on this flight. You'll need to come with us. No, you can't do this, Karen shouted, her voice rising in pitch, panic flooding her features. You'll regret this. Marcus watched as the officers led her away, her face a mix of anger and fear. He felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that justice was being served, even if it was a small victory in a much larger battle. As the tension in the cabin dissipated, Marcus turned to Lisa, who looked both relieved and shaken. Thank you for recording everything, he said, his voice sincere. It takes courage to stand up like that. I just couldn't believe what was happening, Lisa replied, her eyes wide. I'm so glad you stood your ground. It was inspiring. Marcus's expression softened. We all have to be brave in our own ways. This is just one moment, but it's important that we keep speaking out against injustice. The passengers who had witnessed the incident began to gather around, offering their support. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, while others expressed their outrage at what had transpired. I can't believe she thought she could get away with this, one man said, shaking his head. People need to understand that their prejudice has real consequences. Exactly, Marcus replied, feeling a sense of camaraderie with the people around him. We can't let moments like this slide. We have to stand together. As the last of the passengers disembarked, Marcus felt a sense of closure wash over him. He had faced down a moment of adversity and emerged stronger, not just for himself but for everyone who had ever been subjected to racism and prejudice. He took a deep breath, looking around at the support he had garnered from strangers. In that moment, he realized that while the battle against prejudice was far from over, every small victory mattered. And today they had made a statement together. With the weight of their collective stories, they would continue to fight for a world where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. As the aircraft settled on the tarmac, the tension within the cabin began to dissipate, replaced by a mix of nervous energy and the palpable relief of passengers who had witnessed the chaos unfold. Marcus remained seated, his heart steady but his mind racing. The moment Karen was escorted away by law enforcement, a collective sigh of relief echoed in the cabin. He glanced around at his fellow passengers, who had all been drawn into the storm of prejudice and bravado that had erupted just hours before. "Mr. Marcus," a voice broke through his thoughts. It was David, the flight attendant, his expression a blend of admiration and concern. "You handled that with incredible poise. I don't know how you kept your cool." Marcus offered a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you, David. I wasn't sure how it would end. I just wanted to speak my truth." David nodded, glancing toward the exit where Karen had just been taken away. "I can't believe she thought she could get away with that. It's astonishing how some people still think they can act like that in public. People like her often don't think about the consequences," Marcus replied, leaning back in his seat. "It's part of a mindset that doesn't want to see the humanity in others." As the remaining passengers began to disembark, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Lisa standing there, a hesitant smile on her face. "Hey, I just wanted to say, what you did back there was amazing," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "I recorded everything and I'm going to share it. People need to see what happened." "Thank you, Lisa. That means a lot," Marcus replied, feeling a swell of gratitude. "I just hope it leads to something positive." "It will," she assured him, her eyes bright with determination. "This isn't just about you. It's about all of us. We can't let things like this slide anymore." As they moved toward the exit, the atmosphere outside the aircraft was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the cabin. News crews were already setting up their cameras, eager to capture the unfolding story. Marcus took a deep breath, preparing himself for the onslaught of questions that would undoubtedly come his way. He knew that his identity as a civil rights lawyer would soon be public knowledge, and with it, the weight of expectation. Once outside, Marcus was approached by a reporter from a major news outlet. "Marcus, could you comment on what just happened?" she asked, her microphone poised and ready. "Of course," he said, feeling the eyes of the gathered crowd upon him. "This incident is a stark reminder of the prejudice that still exists in our society. It's painful to witness, but it also serves as a call to action. We must confront racism wherever it appears and support one another in the fight for equality." The reporter nodded, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. "And what do you hope will come from this?" "I hope that this moment will inspire others to speak out against injustice. We need to foster understanding and empathy, not just tolerance. It's time for change." With that, the floodgates opened. More reporters crowded around, their questions overlapping in a chaotic symphony of urgency. Marcus took a deep breath, channeling the calm he had displayed on the plane. He knew that this was his moment to shine a light on the issues that mattered most. Meanwhile, Lisa stood to the side, recording the entire exchange. She felt a swell of pride as she watched Marcus articulate his thoughts with such clarity and purpose. The video she had captured on the flight began to circulate online, garnering attention and sparking conversations across social media platforms. As the day progressed, the incident was reported on every major news channel. Headlines blared about the flight of fury as clips of Marcus's powerful speech played on repeat. Viewers witnessed the ugly reality of racism, but they also saw a man standing tall against it, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. That evening, as Marcus prepared for a press conference, he reflected on the whirlwind of events that had transpired. He was exhausted but invigorated, ready to use this platform for good. David joined him backstage, offering encouragement. "You're going to do great. Just remember, you're not alone in this." "I appreciate that, David. It's a lot of pressure, but I know it's worth it," Marcus replied, adjusting his tie and taking a deep breath. The press conference began, and Marcus stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of reporters. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust forward as he took a moment to gather his thoughts. "Thank you all for being here today," he started, his voice steady and strong. "What happened on that flight was not just an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a larger societal issue that demands our attention. We must recognize that racism exists in many forms, and it is our responsibility to confront it head-on." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. "I stand before you not just as a lawyer, but as a member of a community that has faced discrimination for far too long. We must unite, educate ourselves, and support one another in the fight for justice. This isn't just about one woman's actions. It's about the systemic issues that allow such behaviors to persist." The crowd was enraptured, and whispers of agreement swept through the room. "We must also hold those in positions of power accountable," he continued. "It's time for change, not just in our laws but in our hearts. We must strive for a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or background." As the press conference wrapped up, Marcus felt a surge of hope. He had used his voice to speak out against injustice, and he knew that he had sparked a conversation that could lead to change. The applause that followed felt like a validation of his struggles and a promise for the future. Later that night, as he scrolled through social media, Marcus saw the impact of his words. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #EndRacism began trending, and people from all walks of life shared their own stories of discrimination and resilience. His phone buzzed with notifications as messages of support flooded in. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of solidarity, Marcus realized that the fight against racism was not just his burden to bear. It was a collective endeavor. The strength of a community united against prejudice could break down walls and create meaningful change. As he prepared for bed, he felt a deep sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. He had the opportunity to lead, to inspire, and to fight for a world where everyone could feel safe and valued. And as he closed his eyes, he knew he would rise to the challenge, armed with the support of those who believed in a better future. If you liked the content, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and share it with your friends. Your comment is essential for the growth of the channel. And look at this video that appears on the screen. See you soon.